Hello, dear teachers. It is a pleasure to greet you today and to say hi to you from the DAP, Departamento de Asesoría Pedagógica of Editorial Piedrasanta. My name is Carlos Mentes. I am the English coach for the department, and it is a pleasure to share with you how to use your book, Rocket Up. Okay? So let's begin. One of the things that we have to keep in mind about this book is that it's a book designed for middle school and high school, from primero básico to quinto bachillerato. Okay, so book number 1 is for primero básico and so on. Book number 4 is normally used with cuarto bachillerato, and number 5 with quinto bachillerato. Okay, it is very important that we discuss some of the concepts that we are going to be discussing in this small time. Book exploration, how it is important that we as teachers explore our books and we get to know our books, and that we're able to dosage our books so that we have a clear idea of how we're going to use the book throughout the year, how each unit of the book is structured, and some suggestions of methodologies that we're going to use. So by the end of this session, I hope that you have a better idea of how to use your book, Rocket Up. Well, something that it's very important and that I do is the close exploration. And normally that means looking at my book, understanding the colors, number 3, and color purple is for tercero básico. The green one, number 1, is for primero básico. So that general idea of my book by still being closed. On the back of it, I can see very important information that the authors share with us, but also as English teachers, what are the levels? And I can see here that Rocket Up 1 helps me to receive my students at level A1, but through the use of those 5 books, I should be able to take my students to a level B1 plus. Also very important to keep in mind the components that I have. We will discuss later on what are some of them, but here on the back I have an idea, a general idea of those components. Okay, once I have finished my closed exploration, I can go to my open exploration. The first thing that I find is the QR that helps me to enter the platform where I will have access to some resources that we will mention later on. I continue with the exploration and I'll go to my scope and sequence. And it's this. This helps me to have a very general idea of the content. So here I can see that my book has been divided into 3 modules, and that each module has different units, has 3 units. So in total, this book has 9 units. And I can see here what is the vocabulary that is intended to be practiced, what are the readings that my students will have, what is the grammar, what are the grammar topics that they'll explore, some of the content, the listening activities, and the writing project. So it is very important that at the beginning you have a very clear idea and you begin exploring your books, okay? Once I continue the exploration, I go to the first unit, and then here they present a brief summary of the topic, the vocabulary that is going to be discussed, the reading, the grammar, the real life language that we're going to use, the listening and speaking activities, and the writing project. So normally my unit will look like this, and this is very important for me to know so that I can distribute all this content properly. Okay, so I continue on the pages, and I can see that there is vocabulary and reading, that there are some listening exercises, that they present grammar, very little grammar, because grammar is not intended to be the main focus of these books. Then I have some exercises that help me to develop more speaking, right? and listening exercises until I finally reach my writing project. That helps me also practice the language in a written way. Okay, so as a teacher, it is very important that I explore my book so that I can go to the next step, and it's begin to dosage my content, my material. So as we have seen, most of these books have between 9 to 10 units. Normally the school year has 30 weeks. So that means that for each unit of the book, I have 3 weeks to complete it. So there's no rush. I have to take my time. I have to make sure that my students practice, and I have to um, make sure that my students use the book. But more than using the book, that they are practicing the language. Okay? A little bit of the methodology of Rocket Up. Rocket Up has been designed under the communicative approach. And what is the communicative approach? The communicative approach establishes that the main intention, that the main objective of learning a language is to be able to communicate. And how do we communicate? When we speak to people. We want to travel, we want to meet someone, we want to be able to transmit our ideas, our feelings, and be able to talk to them, okay? But when they talk back to us, we want to be able to listen and comprehend and understand what is it that they're saying, right? Sometimes we need to write, or we need to communicate with them in a written way, or they read whatever information they also want to share with us. So it is important that those four skills are developed under the communicative approach. That's the idea, that our students are able to communicate. And so you might ask, where is the grammar and where is vocabulary? Well, grammar is in there, in the reading that we do, in those texts, in those audios that we listen to, in those sentences and those conversations that we have, or whatever we express. There is grammar, there is vocabulary. The idea here is that we don't use grammar and we spend most of our time teaching grammar rules and formulas and only teaching vocabulary lists, but the idea is that we use those two very important elements as a source of communication. So in English, we have what we call FOMP, is an acronym that we use. FOMP stands for form, use, meaning, and pronunciation. So as we're reading, as we're listening, writing, speaking, we have to make sure that we're using the correct form. And that's where grammar comes in. That's where vocabulary and spelling the words correctly comes in. But not only the form, but the meaning. What is the intention? What is the meaning of whatever word we're saying, or whatever expression or sentences we are saying? What is the meaning behind those sentences? What is the intention? And who uses those words, who uses those expressions, in what context, in a very formal or informal context? um, and of course the pronunciation. How do we pronounce words, but not only words, phrases, correct sentences? Because when we intend to communicate, what we want to communicate accurately and with fluency. Okay, so keep that in mind, the communicative approach. Now let's go a little bit to the immersion process. It is very important that we as teachers understand that our students go through a process of immersion. What does that mean? That if you remember when you were a kid or when you were younger, you learn your native or first language by first listening. It's like if you were taken and placed into a community or into a family, and through the interaction with your family, with your community, by listening to the language, you started producing the language. But first you became familiar with the language by listening to it. So there, the importance of having enough activities and enough language being heard or being listened to inside the classroom. So keep that in mind. Some of the methodologies that help us to improve and to begin producing in a language is what we call in English total physical response, TPR. It's a very simple method. I'm pretty sure you have seen it in your experience. Like when you say stand up and your students stand up, or when you say sit down and your students sit down, or when you say close your book, open your book, close your book, put your big book aside. Well, you are using the language and your students are listening to the language, but they are performing an action. They are giving you a physical answer, a physical response, and it's completely physical. There is no speaking happening, but it's helping them to understand and become familiar with the language at first. So my invitation is for you to begin using it, okay? Lexical approach. The lexical approach is when we have list of words and we want to, as teachers, teach vocabulary to our students. But sometimes what we do is that we teach them individual words: father, mother, sister, brother, cousin. And lexical approach uh, invites us to instead use lexical chunks. And what is a lexical chunk? Instead of saying father, mother, we could perhaps learn to say, I love my mom and my father. So I'm actually learning father and mother, but I'm also learning a complete or full expression or sentence, right? The idea is not to pay attention to the grammar, but to pay attention to the whole chunk, to the whole phrase, okay? Or I have two sisters and three brothers. That's a full chunk. We're still practicing the words sisters and brothers, but inside of a full sentence. So that's what we call the lexical approach in using lexical chunks or chunks of language in instead of just introducing individual words. Okay, let's talk really fast a little bit about the components. Rocket Up has a teacher's guide, a digital teacher's guide. You will also have access to an interactive book for those of you that like to present the book and have your students follow up on whatever exercise you're doing. There is a book. There is a web page that is going to allow you to project the book. There is another web page, which is Educar Virtual, where you will have access to reproducing your audios, videos, and having all these elements inside the classroom. So those are some of the main components of Rocket Up. And the basics. The basics teachers is coming to a class prepared with a lesson plan. There are in English specific frameworks. When we have the four skills: reading, listening, speaking, and writing, we divide them and we say listening and reading are the receptive skills. Speaking and writing are productive skills because we are producing language. So normally we use a for planning we use a framework that is PDP for the receptive skills and PPU for the productive skills. In future training sessions, we will be discussing these frameworks more in detail. But as of right now, I want to invite you to not show up to a classroom with a good plan, okay? I want to wrap it up by inviting you to our future online training sessions. In these sessions, we have divided them by modules. So we will be developing different modules. We will be talking about the language, English as a module, the learning module, how do we learn? How do students learn English? The teaching module, things to consider when we teach a language, the speaking, listening, reading, and writing modules, which will provide you with more detail into PDP and PPU, but also strategies and activities to begin developing better these skills with your students. It has been a pleasure. Thank you for your attention, and hopefully, you find this information helpful as you begin to move forward into 2026. Big hug from DAP and Editorial Piedrasanta. Thank you very much for watching, and see you soon.